Auspicious greeting. Welcome back to the core teaching class. Last class, we talked about the four foundation of mindfulness. Just to review, they are mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of the mind, and mindfulness of the phenomena or dharma. The foundation of mindfulness is the training of concentration, which not only build concentration, but also help us gain insight into the true nature of our body, feeling, mind, and all the rest of the phenomena. From learning about the Buddha's teachings, we learn that sufferings arise due to our ignorance of the true realities of life, meaning we do not see things as they are, as they're supposed to be, instead of what we think it is. Therefore, it is all about this mind. When the Buddha attained enlightenment, the first thing that he exclaimed is, "Amazing, amazing, all sentient beings have the same Buddha wisdom and virtue, yet they fail to realize it due to their delusion and to their attachment." And also, in the verses of the shared moralities of the seven Buddhas in the Vinaya in four division, it also recorded this: cease all evil, practice all good, purified one's mind. These are the teachings of the Buddha. From these two passages, we can see that we all have the same wisdom and virtue as the Buddha. However, the main difference between the Buddha and us, the ordinary people or the ordinary being, is that the Buddha realized the truth of the universe and became liberated, while we're still ignorant, with which we create a lot of sufferings for ourselves. Chan Master Huizong once described the mind and the Buddha nature as the ice and the water. He said, "Consider water. When it is cold, the water would freeze into ice. When it is warm, the ice would become water. So when we're ignorant, our Buddha nature would freeze into the mind. When we're awakened, our mind would melt into the nature. The mind and the Buddha nature are one and the same." And of course, this mind is referred to the deluded mind. "It is only due to ignorance and awakening that there is a difference." Just like Master Huizhong's metaphors about deluded mind and the true mind, they're like water and ice. Water and ice are made of the same substance, H2O, as we all know. It is due to the difference in temperature that would create the difference in their form, like whether it's liquid or ice or solid. The mind is also like a coin. It has two aspects to it. Just like the two sides of the coin, it's different, but it's of the same coin. And of course, for our mind, we have the deluded mind and the true mind. And it is one, just like this coin. It is not like we need to seek the true mind to replace this deluded mind, because obviously, like the Buddha mentioned, it's already in us already. Like this Buddha nature and this Buddha wisdom is already within us. It's waiting for us to discover it. If we have attachment and give rise to defilement like greed, angers, and ignorance, then the mind became deluded. If we practice and gain insight, then, of course, the mind becomes pure. Therefore, the key to practice lies in taming and purifying this mind and ultimately realizing the Dharma. This is why it is important for us to understand this mind, which is also sometimes referred to as our consciousness. In the Buddha's time, we normally see the Buddha refer to the consciousness in the five aggregate or in the 12 link of dependent originations. And again, if you're unfamiliar with these two terms, please go back to the spring course. We have classes on these two terms. And of course, it then begs the question of what does consciousness mean in in the Buddha's time? Or what does the Buddha actually refer to when he mentioned consciousness? In one of the sutras, the Buddha clearly described what consciousness is referred to, which I have also found the same definition in other sutras as well. And here's what the Buddha said. The Buddha said this, and what is consciousness? The 6 classes of consciousness are eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, intellect consciousness. This is called consciousness. From this passage, we can see that consciousness refer to these 6 classes of consciousness that I have just read. And in one of the sutras, the Buddha told us that if we directly know the path leading to the cessation of consciousness, the alert of consciousness, the drawback and escape from consciousness, we can be released from sufferings. In other words, understand the true nature of what consciousness so that we don't cling to it and we don't become attached to it. And because of this non-attachment, because of not clinging to it, it would help us become free from sufferings. When we don't know consciousness as it really is, then desires and craving would arise due to the pleasure and happiness that arise independent of the consciousness. And with craving, of course, would then cling to it. Therefore, afflictions and sufferings would follow. And later on, after the Buddha attained Nirvana, and then in the later development of Buddhism, or I should be more specifically, it's the development of Mahayana Buddhism. And of course, if you're a little bit uncertain, you can go back to the spring course to learn more about it. The Yogacara school, or we also call it the consciousness only school, arise. The reason why it is called the consciousness only school is because the school advocates that all phenomena arise from the consciousness. And in other words, all the things that we see, we hear, and smell, and so on, like all these things are the activities of the mind. It all arises from this consciousness. The Yogacara school presents the most systematic and the most detailed version of the Buddhist theory of mind or consciousness, or the Buddhist psychology within the Buddhist traditions. Yogacara practitioners describe the process of transforming from a deluded mind to the true mind as converting the consciousness into wisdom. A well-known teachings from the Yogacara school is the 8 layers of consciousness. So now, of course, this is different than what the Buddha present in the Buddha's time. In the Buddha's time, the Buddhas referred to the 6 consciousness when he talked about consciousness. And for the Yogacara school, they present that there are 8 consciousness. A question we might then have is, how did the Yogacara master know all these details about the mind? Like, how do they find out about the 8 consciousness? Although the Buddha didn't teach about the 8 consciousness in his time, the great masters from the later period have gone into deep meditative state. Like in deep meditation, they have observed these mental phenomena and of course wrote them into commentary and taught it to everyone. So that's how we know that there are the 8 consciousness and all these mental qualities. Today, we're going to explore what each of these layers of consciousness is and the role that they play, as well as how each consciousness interact with each other. Through better understanding our consciousness, we can better contemplate how consciousness is not self and how this practice fit into all of this. When we talk about the 8 layers of consciousness, there's actually a poem that describes the role that each consciousness play quite well, I think. And this is what the poem said. 8 brothers live under one roof. One is sharp, one is dim, 5 brothers do business out front, and the last one keep tabs on everything. And so from the poem, we can see that there are 5 consciousness that interact with the outside. There is one that's sharp, and there's one that's theme, and of course, there's one consciousness that keep a hold of everything. Now let us look at what are the 8 consciousness and their role in our mind. See if you can identify which consciousness is which brothers. Now let us talk about the first 5 consciousness. The 5 brothers who go out to do business obviously refer to the first 5 consciousness, which are the eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, and the body consciousness. The first 5 consciousness help us gather information about our surrounding, relying on their sense organ. Our 5 sense organs, just in case if you don't know, there are eyes, ears, nose, tongues, and body. And these 5 sense organ would interact with their sense object to give rise to the associate consciousness. It is important to note that each consciousness is specific to one sensory field. And let me give you an example. For example, our eyes are watching this video right now. So of course, the sight is the sense object. So when our eyes see the sense object like the video, then eye consciousness would arise. And of course, just like I've mentioned, each consciousness is specific to one sensory field. So right now, your eye consciousness would arise. Other consciousness, such as your ears or your body or your nose, like all these other consciousness would not arise. The 5 consciousness don't make distinction about what they're sensing. And in other words, they don't discriminate. They're more like an awareness. Therefore, they don't determine what they're sensing, though they do aware that the sense organ is sensing something. We can think of it as they are just sensing the raw material without any discrimination about what is being sensed. They're the one that bring external information back to the mind, without which we may not be able to interact with the outside world. When the 5 consciousness arise, the 6th consciousness would also arise along with it. The 6th consciousness is also called Manos Vijnana. So that's where it translates from. The 6th consciousness is the main center for mental activities because it is the consciousness which distinguish the various phenomena. And in other words, it discriminates against all these phenomena and make decision on the actions that we want to perform. And some of the other functions that the 6th consciousness has is, of course, when we talk about discrimination, it contemplate or think. It has a function of determination, memorization, arising of all kinds of feelings and emotions. It would actually pull out labels, concept, or idea, or our views, our feelings, our past experience from the 8th consciousness, which we'll talk about in a bit, in order to determine what the 5 consciousness, like what the 5 consciousness has sensed, or the information that they bring back. We also make decision or give rise to our intention with this consciousness, which wholesome and unwholesome mental karma is created at this point. So, for example, when our ears hear the school bell, our ear consciousness would arise, and the 6th consciousness arise along with this ear consciousness and receive information from it. Then it would pull out all the labels and concept and past experience and so on to distinguish that what we're hearing is the school bell. Well, from past experience, it told us that the school bell at this time tell us that class end. Therefore, our 6th consciousness would then make a decision to start packing. So it would send a signal to our body, and of course, with our hand would start to pack. So another example is listening to this class. Again, your ear consciousness would arise when you heard the sound from my voice, I guess. The sixth consciousness would help us understand the teachings from what we hear. The sixth consciousness can also arise on its own. Like, even if our five consciousness are not working right now, like we're sleeping, the sixth consciousness can arise on its own. And when does it arise? It arises when we're thinking about things, like when we're daydreaming. Right now, you're watching the video, but then in your mind, maybe you're thinking, oh, I need to do this afterward, or I need to do that for tomorrow. And you start to like jump from a thought to a thought to a thought. So when we're daydreaming, that's when the sixth consciousness arises on its own. Or when we dream at night. So when we're sleeping, our senses are all closed, they're all resting. But the sixth consciousness can arise on its own in our mind, and of course, we dream. And it would also arise on its own when we meditate. So these are the few times where the sixth consciousness would arise on its own. The sixth consciousness can also determine the world that we live in because it all depends on how we think and perceive about what we're sensing. If we think positive or negative about things, the outcome would be different. For example, you're climbing a mountain with your friends. As you're getting close to the peak, you start to feel very tired and you feel like you cannot go on any longer. But at this moment, your friend turned back and said to you, "We're almost there." And upon hearing it, your sixth consciousness would give you energy to move on because you're probably thinking, oh yeah, I'm almost there. I can do a few more like step. And so it would give you the energy to do so. However, if at this point, if you think that I cannot do it, and I mean, you would not be able to do it because this is what you believe. This is what your mind is already telling yourself. Everything would change if we change the way that we think or perceive about things with this sixth consciousness. Therefore, this is also the key for our cultivation and for purifying this mind. Now, can you guess which brother this consciousness is? I think you might have probably already guessed it. The sixth consciousness is the brother that's bright. So far, we have examined the first six consciousness, and we can see that the first five consciousness collect the raw material or the raw data from the external world, and the sixth consciousness would work with these information and make a decision on what we want to do with it, and of course create karma because of it, mental karma at this point. Therefore, the Buddha told us to guard our sixth sense like guarding the entrance gate to a kingdom, making sure no enemy or thief can come in. And of course, the Buddha also once told us we should guard our sixth sense just like a turtle. So there's the story where once the Buddha was walking along the river with a disciple. Across the river, the Buddha and his disciples saw a turtle slowly crawling up on the riverbank. Then at this point, there is this hungry fox that came by and want to eat the turtle. When the turtle sensed danger, it quickly head, tail, and four limp back into the shell. The fox tried to eat the turtle, but of course couldn't because the turtle was hidden inside the shell. After some time, the fox gave up and just ran off. The turtle moved back to what it's doing before the fox left. It is this time when the Buddha said to his disciple, "The people of this world are no match for this turtle. When the turtle is confronted with danger, he knows to retract its tail, its head, and legs. However, worldly people are completely unaware that impermanence, a murderous ghost, is constantly watching them, wanting to seize their lives. Instead, they willfully indulge their six senses of eyes, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind in pursuing the six external sense object of form, sound, scent, taste, touch, and phenomena. In turn, they perform all kinds of evil deeds and give the demons of vexation, death, and sickness opportunities to take advantage of them. In this way, they're driven by their karma, endlessly transmigrating within the sixth realm and sufferings from all kinds of adversities. This is entirely due to their inability to master their mind, giving rise to their continuous sufferings in the cycle of death and rebirth. In this parable, the Buddha taught the disciple to guard its sixth sense organ just like this turtle, not allowing ourselves to indulge in our sixth sense with their objects. We can try to guard our sixth sense organ. However, we also relied on them to interact with our surrounding. So when we interact with their surrounding, our consciousness would arise. When we can't just seclude ourselves in the mountain because we still have to live in the societies. So it's not correct to like, oh, if this is the case, should I just hide in the mountain and live on my own? So this will not do. This is not what practice is about. The more important thing is actually to be mindful of your thoughts and feelings when the sixth consciousness is working with it. Now, let us look at the seventh consciousness, which we also call the Manas Vijnana. Seventh consciousness is constantly contemplating that the eighth consciousness is one, like it is the self, it is permanent and one entities, and it is myself without a break. Like it just continuously contemplate that, oh, the eighth consciousness is me, it's the self. It creates self-attachment. It makes us attached to this self and what's mine. This is why we always think from our own perspective, why we're selfish. It is functioning below the level of normal conscious awareness and are thus not consciously controllable. It is functioning every moment. Therefore, when something flies toward our eyes, we will automatically blink in response to protect our eyes. When the Manas consciousness work in our mind, the four fundamental delusion would also arise alongside with it. And the four type of delusion or four fundamental delusions are self-delusion or self-love, view of self, self-conceit, and self-love. And so for self-delusion, let me just explain it a little bit so that you know. Self-delusion is actually ignorance of the facts that we're not non-self and continue to become greatly attached to this self. For view of self, it means that we believe the five aggregate is the real self, cling to our own views and understanding. This is why we want others to agree with us. And self-conceit is basically one's arrogance, make us compared with others. It make us think that we're better than other people. And for self-love is attachment to this self and what is pleasurable to this self. So the Manas consciousness serve as the basis for the sixth consciousness. What this means is that when the sixth consciousness is perceiving an object, the seventh consciousness will tell the sixth consciousness to view it subjectively from the point of view of me and mine. For example, if we need to work with a colleague whom we dislike, then every time we see him, at the first instant, of course, we identify who this person is, maybe John. The second instant, with the influence from the Manas consciousness and of course from the past labels and memories we're working with the person, the label of I don't like him would arise. Therefore, we will have a hard time working with this person. However, if we can be mindful of these unpleasant feelings that arise due to the fact that we don't like this person, we can remind ourselves that the sense of I are only the result of the seventh consciousness, and it is covered by the four fundamental delusions. It is not reliable and it is not true. And because we change the way that we see the person by understanding that this subjective I are not as real as we think it is, then we will not continue to give him negative label, and maybe we will be able to see a new side of the person and we can work better with the person. From learning about the characteristic of the seventh consciousness, we can see that, of course, the seventh consciousness is the brother who keep a tab on everything. Eighth consciousness. Eighth consciousness, I think I've mentioned it twice in the material before. So basically, eighth consciousness is the one that the seventh consciousness cling to as this I. It is also called the Alaya Vijnana, or the storehouse consciousness. Now, you should probably guess which brother it is already. It is the one that's theme. And we might wonder, okay, so why is this consciousness theme? It is mainly because you can think of the Alaya consciousness as a large storehouse. It stores all the impressions, whether it's physical, verbal, and mental activities from other consciousness, and retain them as potential energy, which we call bija or seed for their future manifestation and activities. We can also think of these seeds as memories or karmic seed. The impressions, whether it's our actions or feelings that we stored, will rise up and influence our actions and behaviors. This consciousness doesn't distinguish whether the seeds are wholesome or unwholesome. It doesn't choose to collect selective seed, so it just stored and keep everything. That's why it is said that it is theme. It just collect everything. It doesn't think or make distinction or anything. So it collect everything, whether it's good or bad. Since it serves as the container for all experiential impression, it is also called the seed consciousness. The potential energies from the seeds in the alaya consciousness will take us into this transmigration of life and death, basically from lifetime to lifetime. So the eighth consciousness is the one that carries us from this life to the next. One very important thing to remember, though, is that this alaya consciousness is not a permanent soul, because it also arises from causes and conditions, and the seed in the storehouse are constantly changing all the time. When the unwholesome seed from the past matured, we become afflicted and are tempted to commit unwholesome deeds, which in turn then plant new unwholesome seed in our mind. When the wholesome seed from the past matured, our heart are pure and noble, our mind are cleared and intelligent, and we perform wholesome deeds that bring new wholesome seed again in the alaya consciousness. In the teachings of the mind only school or consciousness only school, it is said that seed give rise to actions, then actions would turn into new seeds. The psychological motives of all human behaviors are explained through this model. Due to the influence of ignorance we carry with us from the past, we're prone to make judgments that result in negative feelings. Reinforced by greed and anger, our minds become confused and form incorrect views about things in the world. However, just as plants require sunshine and rain to blossom and bear fruit, similar conditions are required for the development of human behaviors. Although feelings of love, hatred, and positive or negative intentions lie deep in the subconscious of all humans, when these feelings are provoked by the people or things that are surrounding us, we must rely on our mind, like the true mind and wisdom, to avoid committing negative deed and to conduct wholesome deed instead. So these are the 8 consciousness that are taught by the Yogacara school. The 8 consciousness are sometimes described as an iceberg. So if you look at the iceberg, we only see a little bit above the water, and there's a whole lot that's underneath the water. So the first 6 consciousness are what we can see above the water, but what we cannot see yet play a large role in our mind are the seventh and the eighth consciousness, which is right now below the water. So in sum, the first 6 consciousness is the consciousness that we know of, and the seventh and eighth consciousness are basically subconscious that are below our normal conscious awareness. So now that we learn about the 8 consciousness and their function, the next question we would be interested is, how do the 8 consciousness interact with each other? When the 5 sense organ interact with their objects, the associate consciousness would arise, and the 6 consciousness alongside with the first 5 consciousness would also arise. It would then pull up a lot of past information, like our labels that we give to the objects, like feelings, experience, concept, ideas, and various seed from the alaya consciousness, or you can see as the alaya vijnana, to help distinguish what is it that we're sensing. At the same time, the mental consciousness would influence the 6 consciousness to perceive the object from a subjective standpoint, from the point of view of me and mine. With the influence from the seed and the 7th consciousness, the 6th consciousness would make a decision to what we want to do. The moment our mind make a decision, there's an intention to actions, therefore give rise to the mental karma. All these thoughts processing and thoughts, feelings, and the mental karma will store back into the alaya consciousness. So as you can see this arrow pointing from the mental vijnana to alaya vijnana. And also at this time, the 6th consciousness will give directions to our bodies to act upon based upon our decision. Now, let me give you an example so that it's easier to understand. But of course, before I give the example, one thing to remember is that what I have just taught about this process of mental condition is only a simplified version. In reality, it is much more complicated than that. So let us look at this example. Suppose there's a little girl of maybe 8 years old. She loved to eat snacks. So she saw this $20 bill on the table. When her eyes saw the bill on the table, her eye consciousness arose. And of course, the 6th consciousness also arise along with it and receive this raw data from the eye consciousness. Of course, like we have learned from other classes, as contact arise, feelings would also arise. And of course, in our 6th consciousness, all these past feelings arise. And of course, label, concept, idea, past experience, all these seed from the 8th consciousness or the alaya consciousness would also arise. So with all this information, the 6th consciousness would then start to discriminate that piece of paper that's on the table to be a $20 bill. And of course, then more thoughts would arise. So the thoughts of, oh, money can buy a lot of snacks may arise. And as the 7th consciousness also feed this diluted sense of self to the 6th consciousness, thoughts like, oh, I can buy a lot of snacks with the money might arise, and with craving for buying snacks with the money, the sixth consciousness would then decide to get the bill from the table and put it in my pocket and then go to the market with it. And of course, this unwholesome intention and arise. When this unwholesome intention arise, of course, the mental karma is created. And this unwholesome intention and the negative mental karma would then store back into our eighth consciousness. And at the same time, the mind would direct the body to get the money on the table and put it in the pocket. And of course, when the girl get the money on the table and put it in her pocket, then she's already committing unwholesome karma of stealing. All these are all stored back into our alaya consciousness. And of course, like I've mentioned before, this is only like a simplified version of how consciousness interact with each other. But in realities, everything happened very rapidly, and it is way more complicated than that. There are much more other mental factors or qualities that involves. Now that we understand more about the process of conditions, of course, it then begs the question of how do cultivation actually fit in? If we examine the eighth layer of consciousness, the seventh and the eighth consciousness are hard to work with because it is below our normal conscious awareness. As for the first five consciousness, they naturally arise when our sense organ interact with their sense object, and they're just awareness. Therefore, instead of working with the five consciousness directly, what we can do is to guard our first five sense organ. So it's sort of like what the Buddha mentioned when he talked about like guarding our sixth sense organ, right? In the story with the turtle. And Venerable Master Xuen Yin has also taught us about how we can, I guess, cultivate with our five sense organ. He said that we should use compassionate eyes to view everyone and everything. And we should listen carefully, listen truthfully, listen completely, and listen with a positive perceptions. And with our nose, we smell fresh air. And with our mouth, we speak good word to give others joy. And we should provide service and help others with our body. All these wholesome and positive actions and speech will be stored back to our alaya consciousness. We can, in a way, we can also consider guarding our five sense, our training of discipline. If all that we do, all that we say are wholesome and positive, we will be free from remorse and have joy. If we observe, the process from ignorance to wisdom is all within this mind. Sixth consciousness is the key place to work with because it is where all cognitions take place. This is why training of concentration is important because it trains to tame our mind. We can especially pay attention to feelings that arise and to perceptions. Let us look at feelings, or it's a sensation in this image. Remember what we have learned in classes before, that if pleasant feelings arise, desires and craving would arise. If unpleasant feelings arise, aversion and anger would arise. Whether it's craving or aversion, they easily lead us to perform unwholesome deeds and say unwholesome words, which ultimately leads to afflictions and sufferings. In order for us to have a choice in our actions, we need to be mindful of the feelings that arise. Now, let me ask you, what kind of practice can we apply? You should sort of remember the mindfulness of feelings that we talked about last class. So this is where we can apply that practice. For us to be mindful of our feelings, the first thing that we need to do is to meditate, so that our mind is trained to be mindful and alert of the thoughts and feelings that arise. Only when our mind is mindful and alert can we clearly see all the feelings that arise. Then we will be able to see and contemplate upon the impermanence of feelings. Therefore, stop this pleasant and unpleasant feelings in becoming craving or aversion. As we continue, we can realize the true nature of feelings. Of course, we have just talked about feeling is a good place to cultivate. Another good place is perception, which is the time when the sixth consciousness is discriminating the object or the phenomena. Remember, during that time, the sixth consciousness is getting all this information from the alaya consciousness. Therefore, what kind of seed we stored in our alaya consciousness become very important. Well, back to that little girl example, when the girl is discriminating what she is seeing, if there are many thoughts, such as, it is not right to take the money without asking, and mother said that stealing is bad, I should take the money to my parent, or I should take the money to the police. If we have more of these thoughts, instead of, I can buy a lot of snacks from that money, then the little girl would probably decide to leave the money on the table or take the money to give it to her parent. The outcome would be different. Therefore, what kind of seed we want to plant in our mind is very important. If we have more Dharma seed, we can see all phenomena and the world with clarity and can resolve all problems and hardship with a positive attitude. However, if we have more ignorance seed and always think about me, then we'll have a hard time when we work with others. This is the same thing with playing a lot of violent video games. If a person play a lot of violent video game or online game, then that person is planting a lot of violent seed in his or her mind. So when in realities in our life, if someone provoked this person to make this person angry, he or she would then, due to all these violent seed from the video game, he or she might act upon it and really like put it into actions. Then of course, a lot of sufferings would follow, and basically also a lot of regret as well. Sometimes some student would tell me that they have tried to apply the Dharma, yet sometimes it feels very hard. The Dharma didn't seem to help them. Think about this. If we just start to learn about the Buddhist teachings, the seed that we stored in our mind is not that many. Therefore, when we're facing with a problem, suppose 95% of the seed in our mind are the ignorant seeds and only 5 are the Dharma seed. What do you think? Do you think the 5% Dharma seed can overcome the 95% ignorant seed? Probably it will be very hard. So when we're trying to determine what we want to do, what we want to say, at that moment, if more of your seed are the ignorant one, basically it would have a larger influence on you instead of the Dharma seed. And then, of course, ultimately, we will probably do or say things that we may regret afterward. And however, understanding this, if we continue to contemplate upon the Dharma and learn about the Dharma and listen to the Dharma, then we're planting more Dharma seed in our mind. So as time, if we contemplate every day, so we're planting more seed every day, then when we encounter difficulties or hardship again, then we'll be able to help ourselves in changing our perspective faster. So let's say if we continue to contemplate, then if right now we have 90% of our seed are the Dharma seed and only 10% are the ignorance seed, then what do you think? Now, of course, it will be less likely for us to have made a wrong choice of actions and have afflictions, because with all these Dharma seed, we tend to be able to view it more in accordance to the Dharma as compared to thinking from the subjective eye and thinking of this desires and aversion and so on. And I think this is also from my own experience as well. I remembered a teacher taught me to contemplate upon the concept of not self. And so at the time, I was like just starting to learn Buddhism. And so I follow what the teacher said and start to contemplate about not self every day. Then one day, a situation happened that caused me to have various afflictions. And of course, I thought, okay, I should follow what the teacher said and contemplate about not self. So I did try. And then what I realized at the moment is that it's not helping me. Like, I understand that there is not self, but at the same time, my affliction, it's still there. So it's not helping at all. And of course, given time, it come to pass, so there's no more afflictions. But that doesn't mean I resolve the problem, of course. And I still continue to contemplate about not self every day. Then after a month, similar situation happened. And of course, because I didn't resolve it last time, afflictions arise again. And this time I thought, okay, I'll contemplate about not self and see if I can like help myself resolve the issues. What I've noticed is that I still have the affliction, but I'm able to change my perspective faster as compared to last time. Maybe last time it took me 2 weeks. Like I have this affliction for 2 weeks before I slowly let it go. But this time it only took me 1 week. And so, of course, it gave me more confidence. And so I continue to contemplate upon the Dharma every day. And of course, I didn't resolve the issues the second time as well. So after a few more weeks, similar situation happened again. And of course, afflictions arise again. And so I start to contemplate about the concept of not self. And what I've noticed is that I can actually change my perspective even faster than before. So maybe the second time is a week, maybe this time is only 3 days. And as I continue to contemplate about the Dharma, sometimes after, when similar situation arise, afflictions didn't arise at all. When this situation happened, I just thought, okay, and let it go, let it be. So contemplation is definitely very important in this process of learning about Buddhism. This is also why in the first class, this is always the first thing that I have mentioned. When we learn about Buddhism, we listen. So we learn from class, we learn it from reading books. And then afterward, it's very important that we contemplate. And after contemplating, of course, this is where practice come in. And a lot of time practice, it's a matter of practice in our mind. It's not about like physical actions. A lot of time, it's just about changing perspective. And of course, ultimately, we hope to realize the Dharma. And of course, now that we learn about the eighth consciousness, we understand that contemplation is important also because it plant a lot of Dharma seed in our mind. So that when things happen, when our sixth consciousness is working, then more Dharma seed would arise. And because with all these Dharma seed, it would help us change perspective. And slowly, hopefully one day, all that arise are Dharma seed. And of course, then we'll be able to see the world with clarity and really see things as they really are. Not what we think they are, and we're not influenced by the seventh consciousness with these notions of self. And of course, having said all those that I have mentioned, and it also ties back to the Noble Eightfold Path. And if we really look at it, like we have mentioned before, it can be divided into the training of morality or discipline, concentration, and of course, training of wisdom. And so basically, if we look at it now, trying to tie back to what we've learned with the eighth consciousness. Okay, so right speech, right actions, and right livelihood make sure we practice the training of discipline, like we have mentioned, and right mindfulness and right effort and right concentration make sure we try to perceive the world as it is and give rise to the wholesome thoughts while getting rid of the unwholesome one. A right view and right intention make sure we're planting the Dharma seed in our mind and ultimately penetrate to the true realities of all phenomena. So again, they're all working together. So when we learn about the Dharma, we're trying to build this right view in our mind. So we're planting these Dharma seed. But then at the same time, it is important for us to, of course, practice meditation so that we would have right mindfulness. So we're mindful of our thoughts and feelings and able to see the impermanence of them. And of course, when we're mindful and alert of our thoughts and feelings, then it helps us with right effort so that why do I say that? It's because remember what right effort is? It is about getting rid of all the unwholesome thoughts and not letting unwholesome thoughts arise and continue to build and increase all these wholesome thoughts. So that slowly all the seed or all these thoughts in our mind, it's always wholesome. And of course, there'll be more Dharma seed. And of course, we will then contemplate and of course practice this in our daily life. And hopefully one day we'll be able to really penetrate into the true realities of all phenomena. So practicing the Noble Eightfold Path would help our consciousness slowly turn from ignorance into wisdom. Remember, seed give rise to actions, then the actions would turn into seed. So it's sort of like a cycle. So we should always be very mindful of all these thoughts and feelings we have and what we're planting into our mind. Remember what I have mentioned about the violent video game? So we don't want to plant all these unwholesome and violent seed in our mind, but we want to always plant positive one. So I think this is why what Venerable Master Hsien Yün said, practice the three acts of goodness, to do good deed, say good word, and think good thoughts. By doing good deed and saying good word, of course, and thinking good thoughts, we're planting all these wholesome and positive seed back into our mind. And when we have a lot of positive seed, then obviously it would also influence our future actions and speech. And last but not least, thank you very much for listening to this class. I'll see you all next week. Take care and stay safe. 阿弥陀佛。